I'm Lillian, 9 months pregnant, and I spent the final month of my pregnancy in a state of anxious anticipation, my body heavy with the promise of a new life, while my heart grew heavier under the weight of a marriage on the brink of collapse. At 29, I had imagined this time would be filled with excitement, preparation, and the kind of intimacy I had dreamed of when I said, "I do," to Nathan, my husband of 4 years. Instead, I found myself spending the last weeks of pregnancy almost entirely alone, pacing between the kitchen and the living room of our modest suburban house in Dallas, while Nathan pursued what he called his much-needed time off. Every Friday afternoon, punctual as clockwork, he packed his weekend bag and drove off with his close friends, leaving me to manage the house, the discomforts of pregnancy, and my growing sense of loneliness. Nathan, 33, works in finance. He insisted that the pressure of his job required him to relax. He needed to recharge through fishing trips, barbecues, and socializing with friends, the kind of attention that was increasingly absent from his relationship with me, his pregnant wife. The change did not happen overnight. In the early months of our marriage, Nathan had been attentive, even romantic. But from the time of our wedding photos to when I became pregnant, he began treating me less like a partner and more like a live-in helper, whose main role was to ensure his comfort without demanding much of his time or attention. The shift became more obvious after I started maternity leave. Nathan seemed unable to understand that my temporary break from work was meant to prepare for childbirth, instead seeing it as confirmation that I now had unlimited time to handle all household responsibilities without his help. When I asked him to help set up the baby's room, Nathan barely looked up from his phone. "You're on maternity leave," he said indifferently. "You have more time than I do." When I struggled to carry groceries from the car, my pregnant belly turning simple tasks into challenges, Nathan texted me from one of his fishing trips. "You can handle it. You're strong." The casual cruelty of those interactions accumulated like small cuts, each one seemingly insignificant, but together forming a wound that grew deeper over time. I found myself sitting alone in the quiet kitchen on lonely evenings, wondering when our marriage had become like this. Perhaps the most painful thing of all was Nathan's habit of using his mother, Claire, and his close friend Olivia as weapons to break down my confidence. Claire and Olivia had become impossible standards against which every aspect of my homemaking and work was measured. I was never as hardworking as his mother, never attractive or socially connected enough to support him the way his close friend did. That Thursday morning, I woke up early, despite the ache in my back, to prepare breakfast for Nathan, hoping to start the day on a positive note. I placed a steaming cup of coffee beside the eggs and toast, trying to anticipate his needs before he could criticize my efforts. Nathan walked into the kitchen with his phone already in hand, barely glancing at the meal I had dragged myself out of bed to make. "The toast is burned," he declared without looking at me. "Do you even know how to use a toaster properly?" I bit my lip, trying to swallow the defensive response rising in my throat. "I'm sorry, the toaster is old. Maybe we should replace it before the baby arrives." "Just forget it." Nathan cut me off in the indifferent tone that had become his default when speaking to me. "I'm sure my mother is already making something wonderful." It wasn't just criticism. It was comparison. His mother's cooking, her housekeeping, even her legendary ability to work right up until the day she gave birth, had all become benchmarks used to measure my worth as a wife, benchmarks I was always deemed to fall short of. "Oh, by the way," Nathan continued, oblivious or indifferent to the flicker of pain crossing his wife's face, "Olivia invited us to her birthday tonight. Don't forget to bring a gift. She's still complaining about that ugly scarf you gave her last year." "I think I'll stay home and rest," I said carefully. "My due date is getting close, and I'm exhausted." Nathan's face shifted into an exaggerated look of irritation. "Oh, come on. Not that excuse again. Pregnant women aren't weak, Lillian. My mother worked right up until the day she gave birth. Unlike you, sitting around all day writing that pointless blog." "My blog. Writing had become my last remaining thread to myself, a creative outlet where I shared photos of sunsets, recipes, and reflections on my pregnancy journey. It was the only thing that made me feel like I still mattered as an individual, not just as Nathan's wife and the future mother of his child. But to Nathan, even that small slice of personal time was meaningless, a frivolous waste of time that proved my lack of practical value compared to saintly Claire, who seemingly never needed creative expression or emotional support throughout her own pregnancy. The following weekend, an announcement was made, and it became the catalyst for everything that followed. On Friday night, Nathan came home with an unusually cheerful expression, full of an energy Lillian had not seen in him for months. "Lillian," he said with surprising excitement, "next week I'm going to Colorado Springs, a little family getaway before the baby arrives." I felt my stomach tighten. At 39 weeks pregnant. "Nathan, the doctor said I could go into labor at any moment. I don't think traveling is a good idea." Nathan brushed off my concern with the familiar indifference he used for all my practical worries. "Lillian, you're always so negative." Instead of considering whether the trip made sense, he preferred to blame my emotions on hormones or jealousy over him spending time with his friends. I knew that if I kept objecting, I would only be accused of being difficult or overreacting. I reluctantly agreed to pack his bags, holding on to the faint hope that everything would go smoothly and that he would be home before I gave birth. But as my husband stepped into the car on the morning of his planned departure, a wave of fear and anticipation surged low in my abdomen. I looked down and saw warm liquid spreading quickly across my dress. My water had broken. Time seemed to slow as the realization hit me. This was the moment I had prepared for, the beginning of my journey into motherhood. But instead of the supportive partner I needed, I was facing this life-changing moment with a man who seemed more concerned about his vacation plans than the imminent birth of his child. "Nathan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the urgency, "I think my water just broke. We need to go to the hospital right now." Nathan turned toward me, his face shifting instantly to irritation instead of concern. His first reaction was not worry for my safety or excitement about meeting our baby, but frustration that his carefully arranged plans were being disrupted. "What? Are you serious? Right now?" he said, as if I had deliberately chosen this moment to ruin his trip. "This is not a joke, Nathan. I need to get to the hospital. The baby is coming." What happened next would haunt me for the rest of my life, not because it caused physical harm, but because it revealed the true nature of the man I had married and trusted with my future. Instead of starting the car or calling an ambulance, Nathan stepped out and walked around to look at me, his face twisted in disgust as he stared at the wet doormat by the front door. "Seriously?" he snapped, his voice full of outrage. "You soaked the rug Olivia gave us? Couldn't you have waited until we got to the hospital to do this?" I stared at him in disbelief, my mind struggling to understand why he was more concerned about the rug beneath his feet than my medical emergency. "Nathan, I need help. This is serious." But Nathan's priorities were already clear. He let out a sharp breath, then opened the car door. "I have to go pick up Olivia. I can't have the car smelling like this for the whole drive," he said without hesitation. "Call a taxi or something." His words hit me like blows. I was in labor with our first child, and my husband was worried about me dirtying his car. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "I can't go alone." "Figure it out yourself," Nathan replied coldly. "I'm not missing this vacation just because you can't control yourself." As Nathan walked back into the house, perhaps to tell Olivia they needed to delay their departure by a few minutes, I stood alone on the driveway, feeling more abandoned and vulnerable than I ever had in my life. The physical discomfort of early labor was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of realizing that the man I had trusted to be my partner in the most important moment of my life had chosen a vacation with his close friend over witnessing the birth of his own child. The neighbors were beginning their usual Saturday morning routines, tending gardens, walking dogs, starting weekend projects. A few of them cast curious glances in my direction, at the woman standing beside a car who was clearly in distress, but I was too shocked and in too much pain to call out for help. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called a taxi, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained my situation to the dispatcher. Just minutes later, a kind driver arrived and immediately understood the urgency of my condition. "Hospital?" he asked, already helping me into the back seat as he spoke. "Please," I whispered, tears finally spilling as the reality of my situation fully set in. The taxi driver, whose name was Miguel, drove carefully yet quickly through the busy Saturday morning traffic. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, reassuring me and asking if I needed him to call anyone. His kindness and genuine concern stood in stark contrast to the cold indifference I had just experienced from my own husband. When we stopped at the emergency entrance, Miguel even ran inside to alert staff before medical personnel rushed out with a wheelchair. The hospital team moved swiftly and with compassion. Within minutes, I was placed in a wheelchair and taken straight to the obstetrics monitoring area. Nurses attached fetal heart monitors, tracked my contractions, and their expressions slowly shifted from professional calm to concern. "The fetal heart rate is a bit slow," one nurse said quietly to the attending physician. "The contractions are very close together. There are signs of fetal distress." The lead obstetrician, Dr. Ramirez, appeared moments later, quickly reviewing the chart and examining my cervix. "Ms. Lillian, how long ago did your water break? Was there any meconium?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. I'm not exactly sure," I gasped. "Maybe about 20 to 30 minutes before I got into the taxi." Dr. Ramirez nodded, then turned to the charge nurse. "Prepare the emergency delivery room. We may need to intervene early if the fetal heart rate doesn't improve. Contact the family immediately." Nurse Patricia, who would later stay with me throughout the delivery, gently took my hand. "Where is your husband, sweetheart?" Patricia asked, as they helped me into the delivery room. "He had other priorities," I said softly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The nurse's expression softened with understanding and professional compassion. She had clearly seen this before, women giving birth alone for many different reasons. "We're trying to reach your husband. We'll need a family member's consent if we have to perform an emergency C-section." I nodded weakly and recited Nathan's phone number, which I knew by heart like a painful mantra. Patricia dialed it right in front of me, putting it on speaker so I could hear. One ring, two, three, then straight to voicemail. Patricia frowned and called again. Still voicemail. I knew better than anyone. Nathan and Olivia had likely left early to avoid weekend traffic. His phone was always on silent when he was relaxing, unless a message came from Olivia or his friends. Patricia called a third time and left an urgent message. "Mr. Nathan, this is Baylor Dallas Hospital. Your wife, Lillian, is in labor and the baby is showing signs of distress. We need you to contact us immediately. This is an emergency." She set the phone down and looked at me with deep sympathy. "We'll keep trying. Is there anyone else? Your mother? Siblings?" I shook my head. My mother was in Florida, 2 flights away. My brother lived nearly 3 hours by car. But we had just spoken yesterday, and today he had a major real estate client. Nathan was the only person I had in Dallas. Or rather, the only person I had ever thought I had. Over the next half hour, the hospital called Nathan 4 more times. Each call went straight to voicemail. On the 5th attempt, Patricia tried sending a text message. "Your wife is in emergency labor at Baylor. The baby's heart rate is low. Surgery may be required. Please call back immediately." The message showed "sent," then "read" a few minutes later. Dr. Ramirez returned, his expression grave. They wheeled me toward the operating room immediately. As we moved down the hallway, Patricia still held the hospital phone, making one final call to Nathan. The 7th attempt. Still, no one answered. At 3:47 p.m. on Saturday, after 40 minutes of emergency surgery, my son, Ethan, let out his first cry in the operating room. That cry was strong and clear, like a declaration that even without his father, he chose to live. He chose to fight. Dr. Ramirez placed Ethan on my chest, skin to skin, if only for a few seconds before the nurses took him away for thorough checks. The moment the doctor placed Ethan into my arms for the first time after I fully woke up in the recovery room, all the exhaustion and pain dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming love and a fierce, almost painful instinct to protect. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, soft skin, bright eyes that seemed to look straight at me as if he recognized the voice he had heard for 9 months. "Hello, my precious son," I whispered, tears of joy mixed with tears of sorrow, because this moment was not the way I had always imagined it. "Mommy is here. Mommy will always be here with you." Holding Ethan for the first time, I felt a clarity wash away months of confusion and self-doubt. This baby, my son, deserved a better father. My son would not grow up believing that it was normal for fathers to prioritize their own comfort over their family's needs. My son would not learn to treat women the way Nathan had treated me. The nurses were wonderfully supportive, taking photos of me with Ethan and congratulating us on a successful delivery, as if my son and I were members of their own family. Their warmth and genuine joy reminded me that this should have been a happy occasion, that the birth of a child is something meant to be cherished and celebrated. I lay there in the recovery room, Ethan sleeping soundly in my arms, his tiny breath steady like a reminder that we had made it through. Patricia stayed by my bedside, changing dressings and checking my vitals with the gentleness of someone who had witnessed too many tragedies in delivery rooms. "The hospital called him 7 times. She repeated softly, so as not to wake Ethan. The text message was read too. We couldn't reach any other family member. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers wrapped tightly around mine, as if he already knew I was his only anchor. A quiet decision formed within me, not out of explosive anger, but from a cold, certain clarity. "Patricia," I said, my voice strangely calm, even though my body was still trembling from surgery. "My husband is currently in Colorado Springs, a resort called Colorado Springs. He's there with Olivia, the close friend he's always talking about." Patricia paused, looking at me without judgment, only the understanding of someone who had heard too many similar stories. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. They booked it last week. He just posted an Instagram story. A sunrise over the mountains." I gave a thin smile, bitterness spreading across my tongue. He turned off his phone to fully enjoy the trip. Patricia nodded slowly, then called the charge nurse, Angela, an older woman with a warm voice and sharp eyes. I repeated the information once more. The name of the resort, Nathan's full name, even his license plate number, which I still knew by heart. Angela didn't ask any further questions. She simply said, "I'll contact the local police department in Colorado. In a health emergency involving a mother and newborn, they have the authority to notify him in person." An hour later, Angela returned with a female hospital police officer, Officer Ramirez, sharing the same last name as the doctor, but unrelated. She wore her uniform and badge, her voice professional, but not cold. "Ms. Lillian, we've contacted the Colorado Police Department. They've confirmed that 2 officers will be dispatched to Colorado Springs immediately to notify Mr. Nathan Wilson in person about your condition and baby Ethan's status. They will instruct him to contact the hospital right away." I nodded, tightening my grip on Ethan just a little. "Thank you." Officer Ramirez looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether to say something personal. Finally, she spoke quietly. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you're doing the right thing, for your child." As she turned to leave, I looked down at Ethan once more. His face was peaceful, unaware that his arrival had exposed everything that was false in my marriage. In that moment, I didn't want Nathan to panic. I didn't need his apology. I just needed him to be unable to keep pretending that this had never happened. I knew Nathan would soon receive a direct notification. I pictured the scene with painful clarity. A luxury resort nestled among snow-covered pine forest. A marble-floored main lobby, a crackling fireplace, the scent of pine and red wine in the air. Nathan and Olivia sitting at an outdoor bar, wrapped in warm cashmere sweaters, laughing over cocktails, perhaps talking about escaping city stress for a few days. Then two police officers walk in, their uniforms stark against the opulence. The chatter fades. The receptionist turns pale at the request. "We need to see Mr. Nathan Wilson. This is an urgent family matter." Nathan would stand up, probably thinking it was a mistake at first. Then his face would drain of color, as the officer said, "Sir, your wife, Lillian Wilson, underwent an emergency C-section this afternoon at Baylor Dallas Hospital due to fetal distress. A baby boy was delivered safely, but the hospital attempted to contact you 7 times without success. We were instructed to notify you in person and request that you contact the hospital immediately." Olivia would raise a hand to her mouth, or pretend to. People nearby would whisper. Resort staff phones would begin to buzz as curious guests snapped photos and posted stories. And Nathan would understand. Not through a text message, not through missed calls, but through 2 police officers standing in the middle of his expensive resort, that he had chosen wrong. That this weekend getaway would become a memory he would never be able to erase. The recovery room settled into its own rhythm around me as I waited for whatever would come next. The steady beep of the remaining fetal heart monitor, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on the polished floor, the distant murmurs of other emergencies being handled with calm professionalism. I had my eyes closed, not asleep, but drifting in the hazy in-between space created by pain medication, when my phone suddenly vibrated hard against the hospital blanket. 3 messages arrived in quick succession, Nathan's name lighting up on the cracked screen like a warning signal. "Lillian, I didn't know it was this serious. You didn't need to blow it out of proportion like this. Calling the police to the resort was spiteful and unnecessary." I stared at the words as they blurred and sharpened again in front of my eyes, while my head was still foggy, each reread like a test of endurance. The sequence was almost painfully formulaic. Denial, blame, accusation. The entire Nathan script for avoiding responsibility played out perfectly through each message, while I lay in a hospital bed, my body weak, my son sleeping beside me. The phone vibrated again. "You're deliberately trying to embarrass me. You always like to turn everything into a tragedy. 4 messages, 4 different ways to turn everything into my fault." Childbirth was serious enough for him to send a dismissive text, but not serious enough for him to leave his vacation. The police showing up was not the consequence of his deliberate refusal to answer the phone, but proof of my drama and vindictiveness. Everything in Nathan's version was twisted just enough for him to remain the victim. And then, like the perfect period at the end of his chain of denial, he repeated the most familiar line of all. "You're making a big deal out of this." My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down without replying. What was left to say? That a dangerous delivery, being unable to reach my husband, and his absence at the moment our child was born were not drama? That a woman who has just given birth should not be punished for forcing someone else to face reality? He did not ask about my recovery, did not ask about Ethan's health, did not express regret for missing the birth or any excitement about becoming a father. I turned to look at Ethan sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady, his face completely untouched by those cruel messages. And for the first time, I understood. The public embarrassment Nathan was so angry about was not something I had caused. It was simply the natural consequence of the choices he had kept making. The curtain around the bed shifted slightly. Then David stepped in, looking like he had driven through hell to get here. My brother was still wearing his familiar client-facing outfit, a crisp blue shirt and khaki pants that usually made him look trustworthy to homebuyers, now wrinkled and speckled with rain. His face, normally set in an easy smile that helped him close deals and put people at ease, was rigid as stone. 2 hours, he said, striding 3 long steps to my bedside. 2 hours I drove, thinking the whole way about what I needed to do to help you recover, worrying myself sick about my little sister. His hand closed around mine, gentle but taut with tension in every muscle. Then I get here, and the nurse tells me that you gave birth alone. David shook his head. No, that's not possible. He pulled the visitor's chair closer to the bed and sat down without letting go of my hand. Show me the messages. I handed him my phone, watching his expression change as he read each line. The emotions moved almost on cue: shock, anger, then something colder, sharper. The look I'd seen before when he went into negotiation mode at work. This was David calculating. Only this time he wasn't buying or selling property. He was figuring out how to remove Nathan from my life entirely. 4 years, he muttered, still scrolling. 4 years you watched that guy treat you like a housekeeper, not a wife. But this is a level of selfishness you don't come back from. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers moving fast and decisive. I'm calling a locksmith, he said. Martinez. He owes me a favor. He can change all the locks tomorrow morning. He didn't stop there. And a moving company. They specialize in urgent moves, separations, divorces, sensitive family situations, discreet, professional. The speed at which everything was unfolding made my head spin, even more than the postpartum haze. David, I said weakly, I can't. Can't what? He cut in, his voice low but firm. Can't demand basic decency from your husband. Can't expect him to be present when you're in the hospital giving birth to his child? His tone softened slightly, but his fingers kept typing. Lillian, he chose his own comfort, and another woman, over you and your son. There's no coming back from that. My phone buzzed again. Not Nathan. An Instagram notification. Olivia had messaged me. I hesitated for a moment, too exhausted to face any more drama. But then I opened it. The message was longer than I expected, and reading it felt like watching the final piece of Nathan crumble to dust. Lillian, I'm truly ashamed of what happened today. When the police came to the resort, I couldn't believe Nathan still didn't leave immediately after hearing about you. I asked him why he wasn't going straight to the hospital. I had to pause for a moment as my vision blurred. He said you always exaggerate things for attention, that you were definitely fine and were just manipulating him to ruin the vacation. David was standing behind my shoulder now, his face darkening with each line. I had no idea you were actually in danger. He made me believe it was just something small blown out of proportion. Even when the police clearly explained that you were in danger during childbirth, he still insisted you were being dramatic. I have never seen anyone so disgusting. I am sorry for being inadvertently involved in this. Nathan has no place in my life anymore. The message sat there like evidence in a trial I hadn't even realized I was part of. Nathan hadn't just minimized my labor. He had actively painted me as manipulative and dramatic to others to justify his absence. Send me a screenshot of that, David said quietly. Locksmith at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Movers before noon. I'll have the lawyer draft a formal notice. I looked at my brother, the man who had driven 2 hours without hesitation when I needed him, now dismantling my marriage with the same cold precision he used to close major deals. He didn't say, I told you so, even though he had warned me years ago. He'll say I overreacted, I said. Even I could hear the emptiness in my own voice. Let him, David replied. While he's talking, his things will be packed, and the locks won't open for him anymore. David squeezed my hand gently. Today he showed you exactly who he really is, David said, his voice low and steady. When you needed him most, he chose someone else. That's not a husband. That's just a man who happened to be living with you. I thought about Nathan, about how he still clung to his self-image, about the way he spoke about me to Olivia, painting me as manipulative and dramatic to excuse his absence. Even after Olivia cut contact because she couldn't stomach that kind of coldness, he kept blaming me. Right now, after all the truth had been laid bare, after the last excuses had become shameless, Nathan was still trying to turn everything into my fault, as if his choices, repeated over and over, had never existed. "Call the locksmith," I said, my voice strangely calm. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock." David nodded, already opening his contacts. "And the movers. Everything of his will be packed before noon." For the first time since he walked into the room, my brother smiled. Not a joyful smile, but the smile of someone watching justice finally arrive, even when it wears the face of heartbreak and a hospital gown. "I'll handle everything," David said. And I knew he meant it. While Nathan was probably still trying to salvage his pride at the resort, reeling from Olivia turning away, David had already begun dismantling my marriage with cold precision, step by step, without sentiment. My phone buzzed again. "Nathan, we need to talk like adults." I looked at the words, then at David, then at the wedding ring on my finger, something that had grown heavy and out of place. 4 years of marriage collapsed into this moment, a decision I no longer needed to agonize over. Nathan had made the choice for both of us a long time ago. Every time he chose his own convenience over his family. Divorce was no longer an impulsive reaction. It was simply the final step of a process that had been unfolding quietly all along. The next morning, at 7:45, David wheeled me back to the house, 15 minutes before the locksmith arrived. My body still ached with every movement, but I needed to be there. My marriage could not end from a hospital bed. "Are you sure you want to witness this?" David asked, even as he adjusted pillows to support my body. "I need to see it," I replied. "If I don't, I'll convince myself this was all just a nightmare." "But the baby, he'll be safe here." The doorbell rang exactly at 8. The locksmith stood there with a toolbox that looked like it had seen hundreds of breakups. His seasoned face carried the quiet understanding of someone who no longer asked why locks needed changing on a Sunday morning. "David's sister?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "About an hour. New locks, new handles. The back door too. The one people usually forget." He worked steadily, precisely. The sound of drills and metal striking echoed through the house that had once been a home. When the second lock was installed, he paused to drink water and wipe his brow. "You know," he said casually, "I see this more often than people think. Husbands forget their wives exist, until the locks are changed. And then, suddenly, they remember they used to be husbands." The movers arrived shortly after, earlier than I expected. 3 people in matching blue uniforms moved through the house with the practiced ease of those who had done this far too many times. The team leader was a woman named Rosa, small in stature, but standing with the solidity of someone who looked like she could lift a refrigerator. She handed me an inventory sheet. "We'll photograph each item before packing. Document any existing damage. Everything is handled with care, no matter whose it is," she said. "Professional and neutral. That's our policy." They started in the bedroom. I sat on the sofa, listening to the familiar sound of tape being pulled, the soft thud of items being placed into boxes. David sat beside me with his laptop, quietly drafting emails and making calls, efficient and calm, as if this were simply a task to complete. "The Rolex," Rosa called out from the bedroom, 3-year anniversary gift. I remembered that watch. I had saved for 6 months to buy it, picked up extra shifts during flu season. Nathan had worn it exactly twice. The expensive things I bought for him, hoping to please him, to become the wife he wanted. The hobbies he started and abandoned, leaving costly equipment to gather dust. Designer clothes that required dry cleaning, suits that cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Around 10:30, Mrs. Turner appeared at the door, holding a container of soup that smelled warm, like a mother's kitchen. She was 73, had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years, and had opinions about everyone, but rarely voiced them. "I saw the locksmith," she said, setting the soup on the coffee table. "About time. In my opinion, he never deserved you." I was about to thank her when she suddenly hesitated, her hand turning the lid of the soup container as if to stall. "While you were at work?" she began. While I was at work? I asked, my chest suddenly heavy. She sighed and sat down across from me. That woman, the one who drove the white BMW, she used to come by on Tuesday afternoons, when you weren't home, stayed an hour or two. White BMW. Tuesday afternoons. The days I always worked late. All the pieces slid into place with a cold precision, like a lock clicking open at the right combination. How long? About a year, I think. But once you started working from home, I didn't see her anymore. I didn't want to say anything unless I was sure. And then, I didn't know how to bring it up. It's all right, Mrs. Turner, I said. Thank you for telling me. She placed her hand over mine. I brought divorce soup, my mother's recipe. I had it 40 years ago when I left Mr. Turner. Best decision of my life. After she left, I sat quietly with that new information, adding it to the growing stack of evidence that my marriage had ended long before yesterday. Olivia wasn't just Nathan's close friend. She had been in my house, in my bed, probably while I was working extra shifts to pay for his expensive lifestyle. Lillian, Rosa said from the hallway, her expression questioning. The home office. There's a lot of paperwork. How would you like to handle it? I stood, leaning on David's arm to steady myself, and walked into what had once been Nathan's office. Pack everything, I said. Everything that's his, including the wedding photos. David's phone rang. From his tone, I knew it was his lawyer friend. I heard precise legal terms being recited, turning my emotional wreckage into text. Termination of cohabitation, 48 hours to retrieve belongings, no direct contact, all communication through representatives. By noon, the house was completely transformed. 63 boxes lined the entryway, each labeled with Nathan's name and a brief description. Pale patches marked the walls where his photos had once hung. The closet looked strangely spacious, with only my clothes left. This needs your signature, David said, handing me the formal notice prepared by the lawyer. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. Nathan's belongings had been packed. He had 48 hours to retrieve them. The locks had been changed. Any attempt at direct contact would be considered harassment. I signed with my stronger hand. The pen felt heavy, but it worked. It felt like signing a discharge form for a patient who had occupied a hospital bed for too long, preventing someone who truly needed care from being treated. I'll send it certified today, David said. He'll say you overreacted, that you're dramatic. Let him talk, I replied. He can talk to the boxes. Rosa handed me the final inventory sheet. 63 boxes. Everything photographed and documented. We can store them if they're not picked up on time. 63 boxes. 4 years of Nathan's. Presence in my life reduced to a number on a moving company form. Too many, and still not enough to represent nearly a decade of marriage. Thank you, I said to Rosa sincerely. She handled his belongings with more care than he had shown during my medical emergency. You're welcome, she said, her professional tone softening just slightly. And just between us, men who choose vacations over being at the hospital with their wives usually take about 3 months to realize what they've lost. The weeks that followed were challenging in ways I had never anticipated, but they also brought a sense of freedom. With David's help and the support of other family members and friends, Ethan and I began a new life. Nathan's reaction to his wife leaving, as expected, was deeply selfish. He seemed genuinely bewildered that his actions had consequences, that abandoning his wife during childbirth could damage their marriage beyond repair. His attempts at reconciliation focused mostly on practical inconveniences, the burden of managing household tasks alone, the embarrassment of explaining the separation to his family, rather than any real understanding of how profoundly he had hurt his wife. "You're overreacting," was the phrase he repeated most often in our brief conversations about the divorce. "I made a mistake, but you're acting like I committed a crime." But my perspective had completely changed. I no longer saw his behavior as a series of isolated mistakes, but as a pattern of selfishness and disrespect that would inevitably affect Ethan as he grew up. I couldn't control Nathan's actions, but I could control the environment in which I raised my son. The divorce process was difficult but necessary. Nathan contested the settlement, claiming I was being vindictive, but the evidence of emotional neglect and abandonment throughout our marriage, especially during my pregnancy, along with proof of infidelity, spoke for itself. Even Claire called to express her disappointment in her son's behavior. "I raised him better than that," she said with genuine shame. "Going on vacation and missing the birth of your own child. I'm ashamed of him." Even the woman Nathan had always held up as the model of the perfect mother recognized that his actions were indefensible. As Ethan grew from a newborn into an alert, curious baby, I discovered a strength and capability I had never known I possessed. Single motherhood was demanding, but it also brought profound rewards my former marriage had never given me. Every milestone Ethan reached, every smile, laugh, and new development belonged entirely to me. Pure moments of happiness untouched by Nathan's indifference or criticism. I returned to work when Ethan was 4 months old, finding a position at a family-friendly company that offered flexible hours and genuine support for working mothers. My blog, the thing Nathan had once dismissed as meaningless, gradually became a platform where I shared my experiences as a single mother, eventually attracting enough readers to generate additional income. 2 years after Ethan was born, Nathan was still struggling to understand how one mistake had cost him his family. He had remarried, not to Olivia, but to a younger woman who was impressed by his financial success and had not yet recognized the warning signs I had noticed too late. Nathan's court-ordered visits with Ethan were infrequent and superficial. He treated these mandatory father-son meetings as obligations to endure rather than opportunities to build a relationship with his child. He often came back complaining about how hard parenting was, how exhausting it felt to be responsible for a toddler's needs for an entire weekend. Watching Nathan interact with my son confirmed for me that leaving had not only been the right decision, but a necessary one. Ethan was a joyful, curious, affectionate child who deserved a father willing to put his needs first. If Nathan could not offer that kind of love and support, then it was better for Ethan to grow up with the clear, consistent love of a devoted parent than with the confusion and disappointment of trying to earn affection from someone incapable of giving it. The consequence Nathan had never anticipated, losing his family permanently, was in fact the clearest reflection of who he was. He had assumed I would always stay, accept whatever scraps of attention and respect he offered, and be grateful for his financial support, even in the absence of emotional care. But abandoning me during childbirth became the catalyst that forced me to see the truth of our relationship. I had married a man who viewed me as a convenient tool rather than a partner, someone who consistently prioritized his own comfort over my needs or our son's happiness. 5 years after Ethan was born, I met Liam, a divorced man with 2 children who understood the complexities of single parenthood and the importance of building relationships rooted in mutual respect and support. Our relationship unfolded slowly and carefully, with both of us placing our children's comfort and adjustment above our own romantic desires. When Liam proposed, it was after a year of shared family dinners, shared parenting responsibilities, and countless conversations about values, goals, and the kind of family environment we wanted to create together. Ethan, now 5 years old and thriving in kindergarten, walked me down the aisle at my wedding to Liam. The ceremony was small and intimate, focused on the blending of 2 families rather than on a perfect wedding. As I exchanged vows with a man who had never missed a single important moment in Ethan's life, I looked over at my brother, feeling a profound gratitude for the journey that had led me here. Sometimes, the most brutal moments in life are the very ones that save us, if we are brave enough to recognize them as opportunities rather than tragedies.